Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. All right, so before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to invite you to check out a few great free resources that I created just for runners. To get them, all you have to do is click on the link in the show notes or visit www.stephanienatchek.com. If you visit my website, there's a little pop-up box that comes up and it'll prompt you to enter your email address, and these guides will be sent right to your inbox. The first guide is my fueling guide for runners. So in this resource, you'll find my top fueling tips for runners, as well as some specific meal ideas for both your pre and post-run fuel. If you've been struggling to understand what to eat when to support your running and just figuring out what those meal ideas, what those meals look like, what kind of foods you should be including before versus after you run, what the difference is between pre and post-run fueling, then this guide is exactly what you need to get you started on the right path. The other guide that I created is my strength training guide for runners. So this guide includes both a PDF resource, has some tips, guidelines, and links to my YouTube series where I actually walk you through all of the exercises in the program. This is a great beginner strength training guide for runners who want an effective but efficient full body workout that helps support the key muscles and movements you need to run stronger and injury-free. So once again, both of these guides are available together. I have them put together as a little bundle for you. You can just click on the link in the show notes or go over to www.stephanienatchek.com, enter your email address just the one time, and both of these free guides will get sent to your inbox right away. I hope you enjoy these resources and find them helpful in supporting you and your running. And now let's get into today's episode. All right. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Fuel, Run, Recover, where I am so excited to be sitting down with Charlie Engle. He is an ultra runner, author. He has had documentaries made about some of his running journeys, and he's just got a really, really incredible and inspirational story to share. So today we're going to talk a little bit about his history of running and some of the adventures that he's had along the years. But I also know that a lot of people are going to be wondering about some of his day-to-day nutrition practices, how he fuels his running, and how he approaches training and nutrition when he's doing such extreme things. So welcome, Charlie. I'm really excited and honored that you've agreed to be on the show today.
Thank you so much, Steph. No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to get us started, for anybody who may not be familiar with you and your story, I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your history, and some of the really amazing accomplishments that you've had.
No, sure thing. Thank you. I have a great Canadian friend that I've done some hard things with, and he swears I'm big in Canada. So I'm just kidding. That is my friend Ray Zahab, who went across the Sahara Desert with me a few years back. So, but yeah, I'm from North Carolina. The simplest version of my complex story is just that I spent about 10 years of my life being really immersed in drug and alcohol culture and kind of destroying things much more than building them. And that was in my 20s. And, I'd gone to college and I thought I was going to be a superstar runner or basketball player. And uh, when I found out that I was pretty darn average at those things, I found a home with drinking and partying, and for me, it didn't end after college. And so, that behavior for 10 years was difficult. I was always like the top salesperson and an overachiever on one side, I think, to make up for my poor behavior on the other side. And eventually I got married to someone foolish enough to marry me, but she grew up in an alcoholic household and, was comfortable with my craziness. And, I tried a lot of things to quit. I went to rehab and I went to meetings and Went to church and you name it, I tried it. And, I was desperately seeking something outside of me to force me to quit, I think. And, the birth of my first son kind of changed things. And I thought for sure that I could turn my life around, for him because, that's what good dads do. And, a couple months into his life, I realized that wasn't possible either. And that, that nobody was coming to save me, basically, and I needed to take that first step towards saving my own life. And once I made that decision and commitment, what that meant for me was, I went to an AA meeting that very first night, and I got up the next day and put on my running shoes. And for 3 straight years, I did those two things. I ran and I went to a meeting every single day without missing a day. And I ran about 35 marathons during that time. And as I like to say, clearly I had that whole addiction thing under control. And, and I was just finding a way to be, I was though, I was finding a way to be healthier and to discover who the heck I was. And, I thought my mission was to get rid of my addict. Like if I ran hard enough, I could kill that guy. And in fact, what I discovered was, my obsessive nature is what makes me good at things. And most of the people that do what I do, that obsessive addictive quality is really powerful and even a superpower. And as long as I don't drink and drug, that superpower allows me to achieve almost anything I set my mind to. And with that attitude, I moved forward and I became the senior producer for a TV show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition for a number of years, which was, a big show. And I started running longer and longer events all over the world and ran across the Gobi Desert and the Atacama Desert in Chile and the Amazon jungle and the jungles of Vietnam and Fiji and Borneo.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And you glossed over, I mean, some of these really big things that you've done. And I definitely want to hear about, some of these in more detail. And, going back to the beginning of you beginning your career as a runner with, your first couple of races and just sort of getting into that scene, you were coming into it with a history of running and someone who was, really looking to replace like one coping mechanism, one outlet with something else. And so coming into it, not really from the position of like being necessary, we'll call it smart about training or maybe smart about fueling and kind of having some of the knowledge and know-how, but just picking up your shoes and throwing them on and getting out the door. When you started to tap into needing to fuel your body differently, needing to do some of these longer, more strenuous, multi-day, multi-month events, how did you come to learn about nutrition for running and how did you come to learn about fueling?
Great questions. And I will say, just to touch on something that you pointed out, I coach a few people here and there. A lot of it's just casual, but I really get, I get on people who spend their life paralyzed about what they're going to do next and are they going to be ready. And there's a lot of value in putting on your freaking shoes and going out there and doing something hard without overthinking it. And I always tell people that, if you didn't have a social media account, would you actually care? And, and I think that people do get a little caught up they get too caught up in outcomes. And I talk about this regularly with my clients and from the stage when I'm talking to groups, especially young people. There's this pressure to pick the outcome or know the outcome. And anybody who's been a runner for a while understands that you may or may not end up with the time like for a marathon that you thought you were going to have, but how you got there is almost certainly going to be different than you thought. And it's so cliche, but it really is the journey. It's about sometimes, yeah, maybe you need 3 months to prepare for a race, or maybe some expert tells you you need 6 months. You don't. What you need to do is you need to slow down, you need to temper your aspirations, especially if you're a new runner, and just recognize, like anything else, that experience counts so much. And the only way to gain experience is to go out there and enter races and try to set a plan with your coach or on your own before you start the race. Try to stick to the plan and see how it goes. And from that, whether it goes amazingly or badly, you'll end up gleaning so much useful information. And I really encourage people and coaches out there too to not let their clients get stuck in this spiral of needing perfection, because there's really the beauty of running is the lack of perfection in it. It's really not possible. So
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go.
I love that you said that because, so many people when they start their running journey, they have one race and they're like, "Hey, I want to sign up for my next one." And they're immediately gunning for that PR and then that PR and thinking that just because they're doing more running and doing more training, they're automatically going to just get better every single time. And that so rarely is how it pans out. It's a different race, it's a different day, it's a different set of circumstances. Like you never really know or can guarantee what's going to happen.
Mm-mm.
And you don't want that to get people down about the validity of being a runner and oh, maybe this isn't for me, I can't seem to get faster. Like, we only really tried 2 times. And there's so much value in just simply having race experience under your belt, that the times that you finish in start to matter less and less the more you do it. You can find other things to be proud of and other things to enjoy along the way.
Man, beautifully said. And like I tell people all the time, and I'll ask somebody who's run a marathon, I'll just say, tell me about your marathon. And invariably, they will go to, uh, you know, 15 miles, 18 miles, whatever it is, that time when they didn't think they were going to be capable of continuing. And then they found a way to get through that. Nobody even remembers the first 10 miles of a marathon. Like, and I'm not saying it's not relevant, but you just don't. What you remember is the hardship. So people will say to me sometimes, gosh, I just don't want to suffer this time. And I'm like, why? Then why are you like, the part of the purpose of this exercise is, and this is what I tell people all the time. I've never entered 100 miler. There is no such thing as 100 miler that doesn't suck. I don't care if it's
Very
downhill,
valid.
if it's downhill and 50-degree weather and sunny next to a beach, like it doesn't matter. It's just going to suck. And at some point, you're going to want to quit. And it's like I say to people, like that is the whole point of doing the event, because I want to get to that place where I can't possibly go on. Then I want to use the experience that I've learned. I know when I feel that way, let's say it's at 60 miles of a 100 miler, my brain says, oh my God, I've got 40 more miles of this. I can't possibly do it. My experience then kicks in and says, all right, this is about calories, hydration, and yes, maybe I need to slow down and walk, not stop if I can help it, but slow down and walk for 20 minutes and get 1,000 calories in my body. And my pain level will invariably go from a 10 to an 8, but that 8 is enough to allow me to continue. And that is the moment that I take with me into my businesses, into my relationship, my marriage, into other things, because those hard times that you face voluntarily by doing something hard physically, I think translate perfectly to the hardships that happen. But the experiences that I've had allow me to recognize I'm not going to always feel that way. Because when you have a down moment, you kind of project it into the future and you think this is how it's always going to feel, whether that's a race or your job or your marriage or whatever it is. And it's just not that way. But the enjoyment of the experience, I've run more than 300 official marathons, and I still love to do them, but mostly not for PRs. I'm high-fiving the kids and I'm taking orange slices and I'm taking photos and I'm meeting new people. And I'm probably running a time that's, I don't know, 30 minutes slower than I'm capable of running. Who cares? Like literally nobody cares but me. And it's such a pleasurable experience. And then every once in a while, a couple times a year, I'll pick goal races where I'm like, all right, I want to see what I can do in this one. So my training will be a little different. So back to your question about nutrition, I've been vegan a really long time, over 20 years, and that took a lot of experience to figure out what was going to work for me. I am a big fan I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to, Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia, and, I would say Dr. Mark Hyman's one of the great experts these days nutritionally. The point of all that is gathering more information is cool, but you know what? They've all got different opinions. If you don't know your starting point, you can't really know where to go. Whether it's Inside Tracker or the DNA company or whichever is the choice that you can work with your coach on. And if you're not working with a coach, then like Inside Tracker, I think is great. It's 200-300 bucks. You go to Quest Labs, you get a blood test, and it will tell you where you're deficient. And one of the things I get frustrated with is how can there be nutritional recommendations if you don't know where the person is starting and what their goals and needs are? But all of that is also, I'm sort of hedging my bets when I say fasting diets are all the fad these days. I don't do it. I don't think it's necessary. I naturally fast because I have my last meal at 6 o'clock in the evening and I'm probably done eating by 7. And I try to make that the last thing I eat. So just by going to sleep at 11 o'clock at night, waking up the next day at 7, sleep is my number one priority in the world, other than my wife. So sleep, sleep, sleep. I mean, you could even say they're number one and two. I prioritized sleep, about 10 years ago, and it changed my life because I thought I was special. I thought I was one of those people that only needed 5 hours of sleep, and the rest of you are just wasting time and blah blah blah. And when I finally made that change, it allowed all my other practices to work. Breath work. I've been doing cold therapy for years. Nutrition. Again, people can eat a wonderful, amazing diet and then they get 5 hours of sleep a night and their body doesn't ever recover. So they don't ever know what it feels like to actually feel good. 10 years ago, I also cut my mileage basically in half and realized that number one, I wasn't going to survive the wear and tear at my age to be a quote unquote high mileage runner. So I went from 80 to 40 a week, and even with ultras, because ultras are mental events. Ultras are basically long slogs where you have to have the mindset to get the job done and understand how to monitor your body during a long period of time and give it the calories, give it the hydration, give it all these things that it needs. So I'm better at telling you, like, if you're staring at a plate of fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy, that's probably not the diet that you're after. You probably know far more about nutrition. I also happen to be married to somebody that is a nutrition like expert, and we are, I eat what she cooks, and but here's the thing I always say to people, inflammation is the great killer of all of us. I mean, ultimately. And so everything from my diet and being gluten free, and it doesn't mean I don't eat a slice, I don't have a gluten allergy, but it doesn't mean if there's awesome bread on the table at a restaurant, I'm not going to have a piece. But I'm mindful of the amount of gluten I take in. I eat low calorie, but very dense food. My protein's probably equal to my carbohydrates. I don't eat meat, so that's not an issue. I get my protein from legumes and nuts and all the right vegetables and a vegan protein powder and all of that. The first step is to be mindful of it and also to understand where you're deficient. So I do recommend blood work for everybody that really wants to be serious about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I use a lot in my practice is actually like genetic testing to
Yes.
look for, requirements and understanding how our bodies respond to different dietary strategies, even to different types of training, just to get a little bit more dialed into, going beyond the general recommendations and really personalizing it for someone's individual needs. Just like we want to have a unique personalized running strategy, running training plan for us and our goals, our nutrition plan really should match and kind of have that same energy.
I agree so wholeheartedly. And because of DNA testing, I know that I have genetically high cholesterol. And so, if I was just to go to my regular doc and he says, "Oh, you have high cholesterol," I might very well be on a statin or whatever. Well, I don't need one. I already do every lifestyle, habit that, will continue to make sure that I stay in the safe zone. But, genetics play a role. Who I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you use a particular company for your DNA testing or?
I do, yeah. I use a company called Nutrigenomics.
Okay, nice. I think
Absolutely.
that's really smart. And again, you've got to know, obviously someone's got to know what the goals are and what
Hmm.
the purpose is. And if you're just in it for the one time, get the medal and whatever, then it might be one kind of plan. But if it's genuinely part of your lifestyle, then of course you need to have a long-term plan. So that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So, when did you start becoming more aware of like nutrition for you personally and the need for fueling, kind of before you run and during your runs? Because from reading your book, it doesn't sound like in your first marathon that was top of mind for you.
I was going to say, well, first of all, of course, I finally got mindful about nutrition even long before I got sober because of a girl. I was living in Carmel, California, and I started dating a woman who had been a gymnast in college in Nebraska. And she introduced me to what I consider to be like one of the first books in the genre, and that's Eat to Win. And this goes back, over 30 years now. And it was the first time that I recognized, the role of things like fat and whatever. I mean, even with my drug and alcohol problems, I was still basically a 24-year-old male who could eat 5,000 calories a day and not gain any weight because I was just, I was still active, even though I had had a lot of issues. Anyway, that was the first book that really taught me things like, oh my gosh, you can do a pasta salad with tuna fish and pickle relish and mustard and a couple of hard-boiled eggs. And some of these things, of course, I don't eat anymore. But that's when I recognized sort of the power, I guess, of nutrition. And so even though it took me years to get my act together and finally make the lifestyle changes that I needed to make, um, I recognized it was an issue. Now, I will freely admit that when I met my wife, I've been married 10 years now. It's my second marriage. And when I met my wife, who played pro beach volleyball for years, and she's like just a badass, she's also had cancer a couple of times. So unfortunately, that means that she's also paid great attention to things like nutrition because it's helped to save her life. So she's very knowledgeable. I was still the guy running 100 miles, and like my philosophy was if it sounded good and tasted good, you should eat it during an ultra. So, of course, that meant, Oreos or Snickers bars, or it didn't mean I wasn't also eating some good things, but I recognized with her what I was actually doing to myself and even used a continuous glucose monitor during a few races. And I began to understand that, sure, maybe I could still get through the race, but I was just making it so much harder on myself. And so she's the one who came up with a plan. She recognized that during an ultra, especially, there would be times, I mean, Badwater is a great example, which I've done 7 times, I think. And it's a race where it's so freaking hot, you get to a point where you don't feel like eating anything. And, and of course you have to have calories. You just have to have some calories. So she recognized that we needed in advance to find some things that tasted good that I would eat. So even if they were protein bars, or she had a couple of, just even dark chocolate squares and things that really satisfied what I was trying to satisfy during an event that I would get through this thing. And I usually calculate it like this, and I don't know what to do with your clients, but in an ultra, I will say, all right, this one is particularly hot weather, blah, blah, blah. I need to take in 250 calories an hour. It's 100 miles. It's going to take me anywhere between 15 hours to 20 hours, probably. Could be more if the wheels come off. So I need to, that's a lot of calories. I'm taking in a lot of calories. I mean, even to try to do 4 to 6 or 7,000 calories during that time period, it's just a lot when your stomach's kind of funky and like, so I take as many of those calories as I can through drinking them. I definitely start my strategy. I mean, just like at Badwater, I don't eat solid food until I'm hungry, like until I'm hungry. But I do liquid calories up until then. Now, for a while, I mean, I stopped doing dairy a really long, even before I stopped eating meat. And, so finding an alternative to things like Ensure or whatever, which are dairy based, and for me would just destroy my stomach. Nobody could be around me for like 3 days probably if I just drank one of those now. So, you have to find the thing that works for you. But again, recognizing I made so many mistakes at Badwater. God, I still think about it. It wasn't until my last two, like it's the only race that I never throw up in races, but I've thrown up at Badwater every single time. And no matter how much I hydrated, I mean I'm going to go off on another tangent here, but hydration is such an important part of training. And what again, the other mistake people make is they start hydrating, 3 days before an event or a couple days before. They get to Boston and they're making sure they're paying attention to hydrate. That's too late. It's too late. Like my best Badwaters, the last two I did, I started and this is thanks to my wife, 100%. I started my hydration plan 30 days before the event. And I mean high volume intake of a good mix of electrolytes. I like coconut water. I try not to use electrolyte tablets. I stick with plain old salt tablets and coconut water. And it gets me a combination of everything that works for me. Now, some people, I understand using, Hammer's got great products. Anyway, I've used some things to great, use, but more natural is better if I can. Um, so, working on an actual hydration plan where you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So I'll just use an example. The last Badwater, God, it's been a while. I haven't done Badwater in 10 years now, but 2013, I set the 50 and over record at Badwater and came in, I don't know, fourth or fifth in the race. And that was good, certainly for a 50-year-old. And it was the first time, thanks to my wife, that I had ever, uh, sorry for the oversharing, but I'd ever peed in the first 50 miles of that race. And I'm not kidding. Like the other 6 times, no way that I could pee in the first 50 miles. And this time I peed 3 times in the first 50 miles. And not surprisingly, not only did I do well, but like two other Badwaters, I've finished that race and had to use a wheelchair to actually get on an airplane, 2 days later to get home. And that's a direct effect of being dehydrated. And that year I literally ran 1 mile the day after Badwater and I ran 5 miles easy 2 days after Badwater. And that all had to do with having a hydration plan. So that was a long answer. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I think for people who are wanting, like, I mean, the ultra running community and the size of these events and the number of events is just exploding. I mean, it's the one of the areas of running that is just seeing tremendous growths in popularity, and also people as individuals doing bigger, crazier, more extreme things. There's just like world records constantly being broken now for ultra endurance running, and how many consecutive marathons and ultra marathons can people run back to back for numbers of days and things like that, where it definitely gives the average person a little bit of inspiration to maybe start getting into some ultra distances. But it's such a different beast than shorter durations, where if you don't hydrate that well on a 10K or a half marathon, or even maybe a full marathon, you're going to make it through. Is it great? Could you hurt yourself? Totally. But when we start getting into these like 100 milers, multi-day events, it just becomes so important, not only for, like you said, your enjoyment and sort of your success, but also, I mean, your survival. Like
Yeah.
there's a certain point where if you're not hydrating and fueling and taking care of your body, it really starts to become dangerous and potentially life threatening. So I don't think that you can understate the importance of just that little bit of knowledge and planning when it comes to, you know, participating in those types of things.
Couldn't agree more. And I really recommend, I mean, look, I tell people all the time, and I know you've heard this saying, but like a 50 miler is not twice as hard as a marathon. It's just not. Marathons suck. Marathons are hard. If you are trying to go fast or like, you're really trying to redline this thing. A marathon is a real suffer fest. 50 miles, rarely, it's not that it can't hurt, the same thing applies, but most people in the event are there for the experience. They're there to participate. I highly recommend that people consider doing like a 6 hour or look for a 6, 12, or 24-hour event because it's usually run on a loop and you have people there. You've got your own people. If you have people that love you enough to come out and man the aid station, and it's a great way to do in a very safe place to like get a sense of what it feels like to go much farther and longer than you wanted to. By the way, too, I'll use this as an opportunity to plug my own event. And every year on my sober birthday, July 23rd, this year it'll be July 22, 23, I run for the same number of hours to equal the years that I've been sober. So I'm doing a 31-hour run in Havre de Grace, Maryland at a treatment center, an addiction treatment center up there. And last year, the 30-hour one, I had a couple hundred people who came out and ran a few laps. It's on a 2-mile loop, so it's super well supported. People would come out and walk or run 2 or 3 or 4 loops, and then they'd take a break for a couple hours, and they'd come out again. And finding something like that is actually, a super way to test your limits without feeling like you're completely like you're not in the middle of a mountain range where you're going to be worried about having to get picked up by the stag wagon or whatever. Like you're going to be fine and you can test yourself in a controlled environment. And don't be afraid of it. It's just people think that it's not a big scary thing. And the hardest thing to do is make yourself hit that button that says enter and pay your money. And like you said, it's a different vibe. My joke, if you did read my book, my story from Australia, I can't even remember if I said this in the book, but the joke that I always,
It is in the
yeah,
book.
I'm sitting there at the start line and I'm like looking around, like going, man, these are some odd people. This is a long time ago, but like I'm thinking, there's a lot of body hair here, and that's mostly on the women. Like it's like it was just it was a very funny experience. It was a great nuts granola crowd. Now, like you said a moment ago, it's become a lot more mainstream, and but I think you'll find sort of that balance between the type A. Not that all marathoners. I mean, I'm not type A, but the of course that's what a type A would say. Um, but right,
Classic.
exactly. I am not. Uh, but like, it's just a much more chill vibe. You set up your own little aid station, you got people out there to help you out. Like literally every single person on the course or at any aid station will help you. They would give you their shoes or the shirt off their back. Like it's so non-competitive with the other people. Now, maybe with the exception of, the front runners, they're getting after it. But I highly encourage people not to be intimidated by the distance, and I would even argue that a 50 miler is easier in many ways than a competitive marathon.
Yeah. My running joke is that ultra marathoning is a cult and that you all are always trying to get people to join your cult. So I appreciate the plug,
See?
but this is all very in alignment with what I say. It's because, I have a lot of clients, of course, who are ultra
Yeah.
runners. And, there's, as every time you talk about, a race you're doing, whatever, it's always, well, when are you going to come join this ultra? When are you going to sign up for this ultra?
Yeah, that's funny. That's very funny. Yes, it is a cult. There's absolutely no doubt. And but you know what? If you, we won't make you wear purple or anything like that. You can just show up. That's actually like, that's a funny Yellow Jackets. My wife and I actually just watched Yellow Jackets, crazy show, but there's a cult in there and everybody's wearing purple, so I just thought I'd say that. But um
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting club, and I think a lot of people are realizing that it leads people to want to take on the Appalachian Trail or go do the PCT or go, cross, Canada. I've done a ton of stuff in like the Laurentian mountain range up in Canada. I did, orienteering world championships a few years up there with a friend of mine. And man, it just really, ultra distances put you in places that, number one, that aren't on roads most of the time. And so you really get yourself out in nature. See, I'm still pitching.
I love it. But I mean, the passion, right? Like, to have people who are doing something that is healthy and good for us mentally and physically, and there's this community aspect. I mean, what better way to spend your time than to be out in nature on the trails doing all of these wonderful things.
Yeah.
So I think it is a worthwhile cult to join.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, it will lead you to, I will, and I'm sorry I'm butting in on your podcast taking over, but
No,
like,
no.
so I've been planning this next big adventure for years. And I also remind people that yes, while we are runners, and this will be blasphemy for some people, but I'm also a very serious cyclist, and I'm a rower, and I'm a breathwork practitioner, and I'm a kayaker, and and all mountain biker big time. And that's part of what keeps all of this interesting, and I think helps keep me young. And I've got a big project actually going all the way from the Dead Sea to the top of Mount Everest, that I've been working on for a few years now, and it's finally coming to fruition soon. So, I'm literally like, but I'm kayaking across the Dead Sea, doing a free dive, running across the Arabian Desert, rowing across the Indian Ocean to India, mountain biking all the way to Western Nepal, and then on to Everest Base Camp, and then climbing to the top. And it's
Wow.
just that it's about cultural exploration, though. I mean, it sounds, yeah, it's a cool, hard physical adventure, but it's much more about immersing in other cultures, meeting people that I would never meet, running local things. And, I understand that's a big lift, and I'm not encouraging people necessarily to take on something that big, but I do remind folks, like, if you want to dip your toe in the water and you don't even want to enter like a race, plan a run across your county or your state, like whatever, a couple 100 miles, and get a support team and pick a weekend and just, and go out there and do this thing, make a plan, get the map out. That's those paper things, if you remember. You're young, so those like
I'm not that young. I'm not that young.
and mark up your map and make a plan and figure out where you're going to stop and get resupplied, and like create your own little adventure. And I think that that's a great way also to know your own neighborhood and the region where you live in a way that you've never known it before. And it involves family and friends, and you can do something really cool. It doesn't have to be, you know, some crazy epic trip around the world.
Yeah, or like you said, even like a sanctioned race that someone else has kind of created and planned out for you. If you're looking to do something, just do it
Yeah.
and just, go make it happen for yourself. I
The
love that.
paralysis of analysis, we call it. And I mean, everybody
Yeah.
does, but in sobriety, that's a big statement, because people get stuck in figuring out what their next move is because their life has changed so much. And sometimes it's just about moving forward. That's what's the most important thing, with any of this. It's a good running metaphor, right? Continuous forward
Yep.
movement. It doesn't matter how fast or how far, you just got to keep moving.
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to, kind of what you're doing right now with your training and with some of the events that you've got coming up, what does a sort of typical day of eating look like for you, and how does that shift depending on like what you're doing with your training? So you said you a few years ago you cut down from like 80 miles a week down to closer to
Hmm.
40. Do you increase that when you've got something like this 31-hour
Hmm.
run coming up, or how do you shift things with your eating to kind of match what you're doing with your training?
Great question. And as I keep doing, I'll answer a question you didn't ask. But my training these days isn't even mileage based; it's time based. So, I'm really focused on, like, I know I'm going to go out there for 31 hours of continuous movement, running, well, there'll be plenty of walking, I'm sure. The goal is to keep moving, and I'll even have a bike standing by in case something happens and like I need to, my mission, especially for this big fundraiser for the treatment center, is to keep my body moving for the whole time. Nutritionally, on a daily basis, I don't have a normal job, so I don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I don't. I'm a night person. I do a lot of work at night. I don't like to feel like I gotta, for me, it works. I'm in bed usually by 11, but, that's early enough. But I prioritize the 8 hours. So whatever time I go to bed, I'm gonna get at least 8 hours, and I'm on like Whoop's advisory board, and so I'm a big wearable device person, and it's an accountability tool. It's not something that you should be like feel guilty about if it says you have a low recovery. But I like data very often. So, and from a coach client relationship, I like being able to see like anybody I coach, like I'm going to see their data on a daily basis wherever they live in the world. And with that, I can tell you, what they need to do that day. So just a thing. I don't know if you use wearable, so but I think it's a really effective tool. So for me, I will eat my first I changed this about a year ago, and this is because of Andrew Huberman too. And he's talked about he eats like 80% of his protein for the day before noon. And it made a
Hmm.
lot of sense to me that I was the typical get up and eat my oatmeal guy, right? So I was eating
Yeah.
something, fairly healthy, and it would have some nuts in it, so there would be some protein. But I recognized that for me, when I switched to having like a really 50 or 60 grams of protein for breakfast, whether it was in a smoothie or, protein pancakes or, whatever it might be, um, that actually made a huge difference for me in how I maintained my energy throughout the day.
Yeah.
Um, and I know, again, you've asked me specific nutritional stuff, and I'm giving you more generalities, but I actually believe in how's that old saying go? I always forget how to say it, but like eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So the other part of my eating strategy is later in the day. Now, if I'm on a really hard training cycle and I am cranking my mileage up or my time up to, for a specific event, of course, that's going to call for some extra calories. But I really try to eat my lightest meal of the day in the evening, and I am a firm believer in you should not eat anything in the 3 hours before you go to sleep, if possible, because it is a sleep disruptor. And if you drink alcohol, again, I don't care if it's one glass of wine or a couple of beers, you are disrupting your sleep, no matter what you may think. I mean, I'm not saying don't do it, but just recognize that is it. If that's your cheat, then knock yourself out, but don't kid yourself that it's like somehow good for you. It's not helping you sleep, and it's definitely not helping nutritionally. So
Or helping your
exactly.
recovery.
And I have one question, Steph, and that is, uh, I mean, people will ask me sometimes too. They'll come to me and they're like, I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic or not, or I'm not sure if I should do this or that. And the question I ask is simple. It's like you don't need to know any of that stuff. It's just, how is that behavior serving you? Like, how is that habit? It's not more complicated than that. Doesn't matter if you're an alcoholic or not or whatever. If that behavior is not serving you, then stop doing it. I mean, I know it's not that
Yeah.
simple, right? I'm not saying that it is, but The goal needs to be, okay, yeah, let's cut that one out because, I'm not going to get to my goal of running a whatever marathon or being healthier for my kids or any of those things if, I don't evaluate each of those. Look, we all have faults. I am still a sugar fiend. And so sugar is my downfall. And I have to really, like, I have to manage my sugar because if it's up to me, I will I can't start because if I start, I won't stop. And like, I recognize that about myself. And some days I'm like fine with that. If I'm in a little bit of a down cycle or I don't, I'm feeling funky or whatever, and I recognize too, I'm sure you do too, with your athletes, this training brings around if you are prone to depression or to some of the other things, training will drive you into that space sometimes. So you have to be aware. I have to be aware of if I wake up feeling super funky one day and like I don't want to get out of bed, I probably can look at the fact that I'm a little overtrained. I might be a little underfed. And that's the beauty of this experience we're having. And of course, of having a coach like you is it's an accountability tool. It's not a I have all the answers. It's having a chance to talk through your decisions and your processes with a knowledgeable human being and figure out if you need to adjust some things.
Yeah. And I love that you're able to speak sort of in these generalities and talk about the shifts that you've made over the years, because getting more protein in the morning is a huge gap in a lot of people's nutrition plan. And this is, whether they have animal protein in their diet or not. It's a lot of people are really under eating all day and then eating all their calories at night. And with the rise in popularity of the intermittent fasting, what a lot of people are doing is they're immediately just going to the late time restricted
Yeah.
eating. So they're pushing all their food back even later in the day. Not great for sleep, not great for performance and recovery, especially if you are someone who gets up and trains first thing in the morning. So rather, your approach that maybe has sort of come a bit intuitively for you of that just what makes you feel your best, but it's something that I definitely talk a lot about with the people that I coach is really trying to put an emphasis on more protein earlier in the day, getting in more fuel, more quality nutrients earlier in the day. And then we're not having that evening, overeating and sort of overconsumption, especially of some of the tasty
Yeah.
treats that we all want to enjoy from time to time. And it really can make such a difference. Even if our calories aren't that different, it's just the quality of the nutrition that we're getting in that I think is really powerful.
Couldn't agree more. That you said that so well, and I'm so glad to hear that that's your thinking too. And I mean, it changed everything for me. I mean, it's also exciting. Like I get up in the morning and I'll go train and I eat an 800 calorie, smoothie that is just fantastic and full of greens and everything is fresh and it really rocks my day. Like that sets my like I'm burning calories all day because I've got the calories to burn. And then later in the day
Yeah.
when I'm I'm sort of done with training. And again, obviously you work with people all the time who have different schedules. Some people don't get to train until the evening. So there may be some incremental adjustments in the way this works for each individual person, but
Yeah. So going from where you started, and of course I'm referring back to the book a lot because I read it just getting ready to have our conversation here. But going back to, those first couple races that you did and getting into running to now, how has your just mindset and your approach to training sort of changed over the years? Like what's kind of happened with how you look at your training schedule and how you approach this whole
yeah,
thing?
man, such a great question. Mindset is everything as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you need to have a plan. You need to have a nutritional plan. You need to have a training plan. You need to have all these things. But I also believe in like I thought about writing another book, a more kind of an instructive title. I think it would be about being intuitive, like intuitive training. Because another thing that people
Hmm.
ignore
Hmm.
sometimes is they get their schedule, even from an amazing coach like you, or me, they'll get the schedule and they feel like they're a slave to that schedule. And without
Totally,
like
totally.
making adjustments. Oh, I feel like crap, but I'm going to go run that 15 miler anyway. Instead of recognizing like, okay, if you feel terrible, like give yourself a break, man, and do that run tomorrow, or let your coach know. And or if you don't have a coach and you're doing this, you're picking it out of the internet as your coaching system, give yourself a break. That's the main way that I've changed, is I really listen to my body. And I will say, like, I am a fan of wearable devices, in that I sort of need to be told sometimes, like right in my face, you're 25% recovered from yesterday. You only slept 6 hours and it wasn't great sleep. Like, to get up and go try to kill it today with a hard workout, all I'm going to do is keep driving myself down into the ground. I literally overtrained for 20 years. Like, I know that for sure. I mean, I overtrained. I every once in a while I would hit it just right. And so the overtraining would, I'd run a PR. But like more often than not, I would fall apart, late in a race or whatever, because I wasn't trusting the mental capacity over the physical. And no, I don't care who you are. There comes a point in any race, if you're trying to go fast and hard, where it's all about your mind. Yeah, your body needs to be in shape, but you've got to find that place inside you that allows you to keep moving, and know that, and just to know instinctively that this pain is going to end and it will be worth it. And that's all. I think that's the biggest change that I've made in my training through the years, is to give myself a break. I will say this, I mean, for years, I there's some examples in my book of how narcissistic I was around my desire to like break 3 hours in a marathon or whatever. And it was so pointless. And it wasn't actually until I let go of that desire that I was able to actually break through that barrier. And then I did it like 50 times in
Hmm.
a row. Like, it was the weirdest thing. Like, I put so much pressure on myself to achieve it that I lost the joy in the experience. And that is the one thing that I refuse to ever do again. No matter what I do, I'm doing it so that I can have a perspective shifting experience. That's what I want every single time. And if it doesn't turn me on in that way, then I'm not doing it. And I think that that's the key for people. If like running Boston is a great example. Like, and if you're trying to qualify, it's a great goal. It's a powerful goal. If you're fast enough to be like on that bubble, and you've got to run a certain, like, that's a fun journey to be on. But like, there comes a point where once you've done that, and I know a lot of people who I give them a hard time. I'm not very nice sometimes. I mean, hopefully I'm being just tongue in cheek, but like, they're like, oh yeah, I ran 4 marathons and qualified for Boston. I'm never doing that again. I'm like, you're not a runner. Like, you just did a thing so that you got a check mark on your wall and you got a couple medals that you can put on social media. The joy of physical movement and of being in nature and listening to the birds and having, these experiences, that is what the true joy of running is. And nobody actually cares about our times, but we grow as human beings when we get out in nature, experience things, and do hard physical things at the same time. It opens up our hearts, it opens up our minds to all the possibilities that are available. And like, that's the beauty. I haven't made a big decision in my life in 30 years without going for a run to test it out first. You know what I mean?
That's what I always say. Yeah, I do my best.
Yeah.
I do my best thinking when I'm running. So I love to get up in the morning, and I love to start my day with a run, because I feel like by the time I get back, I've just like I've planned out the rest of my
Yeah.
day. I know exactly what I have to get done. I've written all my emails in my head and
Yep.
solved all my problems for the day. It's just such a nice time. And even, whether you listen to music or a podcast, or you just like to be with, the the sounds of nature or whatever you're listening to. I just think it's me
Yeah.
time, right? It's that personal time alone with yourself that we don't get unless we make the
Yeah.
time. Like when else do you get to just like be with your own
And it's a
thoughts?
confirmation. You said it really well. To me, it's a confirmation of decisions. I mean, a lot of times it's business, it could be personal, it could be, I mean, I remember certain runs when I knew I was going to ask my wife to marry her, I literally ran on it the same way other people might, pray on it or something. Like I went, but for me, any decision really requires the physical heart opening experience of going for at least a walk or a run or just doing deep breathing and getting out there. And you kind of know. I always say that all the marbles in my head, that like it's a very busy roulette wheel up there all the time. And like when I move my body, those marbles all settle down and my brain will automatically lift the thing to the top that I need to be thinking about. And where else can you get that? I mean, I actually don't, I don't think there's any place that you can get that, other than through physical movement of some kind.
Yep, yep. I absolutely agree. So you mentioned already this was the next thing that I wanted to touch on today. You mentioned kind of tech and wearables and being really interested in using some of this data. So tell us a little bit more about some of the tech that you really like to use. And now, I mean, going back some years to when you were doing things like running through the
Mm,
Sahara and doing all of your bad water races and everything, I don't know that a lot of this stuff was necessarily
mm-mm.
on the market yet, but please correct me if I'm wrong and tell me about some of the devices that you've used and enjoyed maybe over
Yeah,
the
no, it
years.
was. I mean, you couldn't get that kind of information without being hooked up to all kinds of stuff. And so it's been a game changer. I will tell you something funny. I was a purist for so many years, and like I did believe that okay, you shouldn't even listen to music. Like you should be out there listening to your body, and it just makes me sound so old now. But my kids gave me before the Sahara, they gave me my first iPod. And loaded it up with like 1,500 songs and they were kind, they put just enough, Bruce Springsteen to like level out the Eminem and whatever else was on there. But it's great. And I recognize the power of having motivational, music, having motivational
Hmm.
podcasts. I mean, podcasts, like yours, of course, are fantastic for going out for a nice walk and a run and getting information and knowledge from somebody else, while you're doing it. And I will say, man, like I did my first, when I really got interested in it was 2008. I ran across the United States. I was trying to set a record for the fastest crossing of the US. I failed miserably, an awful experience, but I did a test with I think it was MD Anderson. No, that's Cancer Center. Anyway, one of the big hospitals in Texas, and I did an MRI. They took 130 slices, if you will, of my heart. So I had to do 45-second breath holds in an MRI machine for 2.5 hours. And they basically, it was
Sounds
awful. They
fun.
basically measured absolutely everything. And so when 20 days into this expedition, when I fell apart and I'd been running 70 plus miles every day. And the hope would be that I'd make it all the way across and we'd do it then. But when I quit, I had another MRI, and the same thing they repeated. My heart had grown nearly 20% in those 20 days. And a week later, we did another test, and my heart had completely returned to its normal size. And so, and they wrote a
Interesting.
very, I mean, look, you can't have a study with a study of one. There's no such thing. But it was information, and it was informative to other researchers around what happens to the heart for ultra runners. Like, and it was one of the
Yep.
very first studies out there that sort of, highlighted it. That's when I got really interested in the data, and so from that
Mm-hmm,
point on,
hmm.
pretty much anything that came along that I could wear on my body, obviously Apple's been around a long time. And so my first forays into that were with Apple Watches that, even to have the ability through Garmin or Apple, and I guess like Polar was around then, but to have the ability just to see your
Yep.
heart rate at any given time, like
Hmm.
that was where it started. And Jeff Galloway was a great friend of mine, so and he's all about heart rate training and staying in, zone
Yep.
two and which I hate all that stuff with a passion, even though I know it's incredibly good for me. But zone two makes me, I end up doing a hell of a lot of walking, and it's so it's my relationship with trying to keep my heart rate down is not great.
The eternal struggle
Oh
for every
God,
runner, I think. I love that. That
oh my
unites us
God!
all,
But my
right?
best times are undeniable. The best results that I've ever had is when I paid the most attention to heart rate. Now you've got HRV as a big metric, which I mean, look, and I'm no expert, but here's the thing I say about wearables all the time. They are not real. It's all algorithmic. So other than your real-time heartbeat, there's nothing else on a Whoop or an R Ring or Apple Watch even that's not algorithmic. So it's a predictor of results or of behavior. And if you are able, either with a coach on your own, to recognize trending information in the wearable device. That is far and away the most valuable part. So if you out there listening to this are wearing a wearable and you get freaked out every day that it tells you you had a crappy night's sleep, you need to let that go. Like that's not what happens on one night or one week is not relevant. It's what's relevant is what happens over weeks and months and years and understanding how to see that data. That's the greatest value in wearable devices as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. What I always like to make sure people understand too with any wearables, tracking tools, apps, like whatever we're using, is to really also understand how we use that tool to then make decisions. Tracking a bunch of data just to have a bunch of data that we're not reflecting on and like using to optimize our daily practices and habits ends up just being like a very expensive investment sometimes into all of these different things that you can buy, and then also maybe not great use of time. And so a lot of the devices, people just need to have an understanding of like, what is this telling me and how do I use that to make adjustments, and then we get the full value out of the experience. Otherwise it's just like a bunch of stuff that we have attached to us when we run, and for what?
Yeah, no, you said it very well, and it's also look, the biggest addiction that I've still got today is, in fact, this phone that I'm holding. And look, we all need to recognize the digital, addiction that most of us have. I recognize it, and I also try very hard in my mental health space, to have a cutoff time. And my wife is a great arbiter of this because she still hates me because I gave her my old iPhone. Like, I don't know, when we first met, I was getting a new one. And so I gave it to her and she was still using a freaking flip phone. She's old school. And she says, I mean, I kind of ruined her life in a way by giving that thing to her. And so, yes, to wearables, they can be valuable, but it should again be the kind of thing, sure, check it in the morning. If you're wearing one, maybe once during the day after a workout or something. But other than that, try not to turn it into another thing that you're having to pay attention to electronically because it's just too much. It's too much. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So before we sign off for today, I would love for you to just share with everyone where people can find you, connect with you, hear about all of the causes that you support with your running. You mentioned, a fundraiser that you're doing in July of this year. So just tell us all a little bit more about, where we can connect with you and also where we can find your
Perfect.
book.
Thank you. So, I mean, really, the catch-all is just my website, and it's just charlieengle.com. So, right now, because I'm promoting it, the run, I call it the Penguin, the run at Ashley Addiction Treatment Center in Maryland comes up front and center on the website, so you can see all the information there. I encourage people, if they're a sober person, if you're not, everybody listening to this call knows, like, you either struggled with addiction, you have a friend, a family member, a coworker, you've probably lost someone to the disease of addiction. I mean, it affects everyone. And so this is 100% fundraiser. So there's no, I raised a couple $100,000 last year and I plan on doing that again this year. So there's no sales pitch on there. It's just like you could do the run at your house. You could come to Maryland and join me if you want to do a road trip. You're invited. And my book is on there also. So if you want like a autographed book from me, then by all means reach out to me privately and I'll be happy to sell you one and send you one. If you want to use Amazon, of course, it's on there. I would also finish by saying I do some social media, Instagram mostly. It goes to Facebook too, but I'm pretty lazy with social. So I go in fits and spurts. If I'm not doing anything, I'm probably not going to show you what I'm having for breakfast. I'm more interested in, if I'm somewhere cool, doing something interesting, I'll share that kind of stuff. My wife has cancer these days. It's another whole long story. So I'm a full-time caretaker at home. So, I encourage, which is also why I encourage people in this running space to understand that there's such great value in the ability to get out and move your body. And, we all have some struggle going on in our lives. So one thing you can count on from me is I'm always going to share the struggle along with the triumphs. Anything I said today about addiction, about running, I'm not an official coach, so don't go to my site expecting coaching. Like, that's not actually what I do. That's what Steph's for. You need to be in touch with her. But if it's about addiction or a question you have about addiction that you want to ask privately, I am literally the easiest person in the world to reach. My website has my phone number and my email address on there, and I receive, messages from people around the world every single day, and I answer every single one of them. So if you have something I can help with, or you heard something inspirational and you want to comment, then by all means.
Wonderful. Thanks again so much, Charlie, for joining me for today's episode. It was wonderful to hear, your thoughts, your philosophies, and, some of the things that you've been working on. And I know that everyone is going to really enjoy listening to this episode and learning more about you. So thank you so much for
My
your time
pleasure, Steph.
today.
You're awesome. Thanks for the great chat. I feel like I talk too much, but like that's a good sign of a good interviewer. So I appreciate it. All right.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. We will see you in the next episode. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.